Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your interest in attending our panel on utility-led transit decarbonization across Canada. We will be covering today policy solutions, alternative thinking, 55 minutes packed and quite excited about it. My name is Stéphanie Lefebvre. I'm a corporate counsel at ABB Canada, also covering for the fiduciary matters. I'm also senior counsel for the electrification businesses, entities and divisions for both legal services and integrity. I am a board of director of CUTRIC since late 2021. So very happy to act as the moderator today on today's panel. I am joining you today from the city of Mississauga. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge this land as being part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Wyandot nations. We recognize these people as people who inhabited these lands. Our ZEB conference would not be possible without our numerous sponsors, which we thank their generous support. Today's panel is sponsored by ABB. So I will be inviting my colleague at ABB, Monib Durrani, who is not only my partner in mindfulness and meditation classes, he is also a dedicated and active member of CUTRIC, and obviously a national sales manager, business, bus and transit at ABB e-mobility. So Monib.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for the warm welcome. And, ABB is very proud to sponsor the Zero Emission Bus Conference this year. If you weren't aware of ABB before, but ABB is a technology company that has been in business in Canada for over 100 years. We operate in 4 business lines, from robotics to industrial automation to motion, and most importantly, electrification. We have 32 locations coast to coast in Canada in all the different provinces. We employ close to 3,000 employees, 30% of whom are female, and from 60 different nationalities, which we're very, very proud of with our diversity. ABB is one of the world leaders in manufacturing EV charging stations, having sold over 500,000 chargers worldwide. We engineer the electrification solutions for the transport of tomorrow today, including smart transportation solutions from EV chargers for the home, through electrified fleet depots, to opportunity chargers for electric buses, to high-power chargers for the highway stations of the future. So we're very excited to hear what the panelists have to share with us today on utility-led transit decarbonization across Canada. So let's get started.
Thank you. We are lucky today. We have subject matter experts to educate us and bring ideas and engage in an interesting discussion. We have 3 panelists. Kim Girgulis, First, sector lead for transportation and infrastructure, key accounts at BC Hydro. In that capacity, Kim works in strong partnership with transit agencies, ports, rails, airports in the province with a clear focus on energy conservation and electrification. Kim is also a director of CUTRIC since 2020. Also on the panel, we have Keegan Tooley, Managing Director for Power On, love the name, a new sub of OPG, which designs, builds, operates, and maintains EV charging solution for fleets. In that capacity, Keegan leads the day-to-day activities and operation of the business, including business development and project implementations. Prior to that, Keegan held a number of positions within OPG. Lastly, but not least, someone who needs no introduction, our incredible Government Affairs and Public Relations Officer at CUTRIC, Grace Riley, where Grace, as we all know, leads successfully, and we thank her for that, a number of national, provincial, and municipal government relation efforts. As if that was not enough, she also leads the quite popular CUTRIC ZEB Committee, which was launched in 2021, and I believe over 700 participants have attended meetings up to date. Before we start with the presentations, I want to remind everyone that there's a closed caption feature on the bottom of the screen where you would have the option in French or English if that interests you. And obviously, we welcome your questions. We invite you to input them in the chat. And if time allows, we will be covering them at the end of the hour. So we will be starting with Grace. I believe Grace wants to present us an exciting knowledge series report, thorough 80 plus pages on, a market scan from all Canadian utilities, their strategy towards this exciting transition. And I'm very interested in hearing right after Kim and Keegan's comments on that. So to you, Grace, thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and I'm so excited to be here as a panelist on this exciting panel and to be on stage with Kim and Keegan. So my name is Grace Riley. I do lead government and public relations here at CUTRIC, and I've been on the file for just over 2 years now and really have seen so much. And I just have noticed how important it is that everyone is involved. So hopefully this presentation will walk you through a little bit about the role of the utility in transit fleet electrification, and hopefully we can answer some of those questions that you might have. So a bit of an agenda today. I'll give you an overview of CUTRIC and where we play in the utility business. We'll go over our knowledge series report, which was launched just last year, all about utility electrification. And we'll really take you through some of the main findings that we have come out of that report with. And lastly, I'll just finish on some recommendations to our audience today. So as you are most likely well aware, CUTRIC is a not-for-profit. We have been around since 2015 and have over 130 members. Our members do include the whole public transit industry supply chain, which includes utilities, and that's really the focus that we're here today. We have over a dozen utilities as members across the country, and so it's really great to gain their insight and support through all of our technology commercialization projects. About us in terms of where we play. Well, actually, it's really exciting news. We just launched a Power Providers and Utilities Transit Decarbonisation Committee this year. That's not to say we're brand new in this. We've been completing technical workshops and other kind of working groups with utilities across the country for over 4 years. But with all of the knowledge that we found over the past 4 years, we were able to really launch a new committee, a committee that's open to all CUTRIC members. So before, our working groups were mostly closed to utilities and transit, but now it's open to anyone who wants to join that's a member of CUTRIC. So really providing an opportunity for members to have a say and to get involved in utility electrification strategies. a bit of an overview of the committee if you're interested in joining what we do. So the vision really is to establish a systemic national dialogue on the electrification of transit in Canada. We have our committee chair, Sharina Hussain from Tessium, and vice chair is actually, this is a typo, apologies. We do not have a vice chair yet determined, but that is going to be decided at our upcoming PPU committee in April. The goal is to share best practices across utilities nationally, and that's for battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, high and low power charging equipment. So really across the whole supply chain. And it's also to set recommendations. So what should utilities be doing? What should transit agencies be doing? And how should the government be able to support us in this transition to zero emission bus fleets? We also speak to our research and knowledge series in this committee as well. So I'll go into it in a little bit, but we did actually just launch our most recent utility knowledge series in October last year. So it's a brand new release, as Stephanie alluded to, very lengthy. So if you are interested to learn more and dive deep into Canadian market scan and North American case studies, then please take a read. I will give you a sneak peek today and provide you with those main findings, but just wanted to say thanks to our authors on this. So some of CUTRIC's best consultants, Janet Eby, Leah Geller, and Ted Wojcinski, and of course our president and CEO Jospa Petronic was heavily involved in the drafting and creation of this report. It's an extremely good read. It's free to CUTRIC members and there's a fee to non-members, but we'll drop that link in the chat if you are interested to read more after the session. So the knowledge series report, what were the main findings after completing this full market scan and case study overview? What are they? So number one, utilities can be involved in supporting transit electrification through unregulated business operations or regulated business operations. So it is entirely feasible, and we have case studies that we can share with you, and my colleagues Kim and Keegan will go through some in British Columbia and Ontario, but Quebec also has a very good case study with Hydro-Quebec as well. So definitely an interesting read to dive deep a little bit more into. Number two, regulatory best practices in Canada are found in BC Hydro's context in British Columbia. But why is this? So there are a few reasons why, and I wanted to talk you through these legislative decisions that have really changed the landscape, to be quite honest. So in 2010, the British Columbia government passed the Clean Energy Act. A key component of the act was the provision of terms defining prescribed undertakings. This allowed the government to designate projects or activities that would reduce GHG emissions and allow utilities to recover their costs from a ratepayer base. Then in 2012, the BC government also passed the GHG reduction regulation. And the regulation defined prescribed undertakings related to electrification that would encourage customers to use electricity instead of other energy sources that produce, more GHGs. In March 2019, the BC Utilities Commission, BCUC, accepted that there is a role for utilities in providing EV charging services. The BCUC would have to consider what specific levels of utility investment in EV charging infrastructure was required just to kickstart the EV charging market, but at the same time not exerting monopoly control of the emerging market and minimizing risk to ratepayers of the investments. Then in 2019 as well, BC Hydro applied to the BCUC for approval of rates for two new services that would benefit electric vehicle fleet operators. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I know Kim will be touching on this in her presentation, but the two proposed rates were really innovative and just changing the scene. So an overnight rate that has no demand charge overnight and a flat energy charge that applies to energy usage any time of day. This was one of the rates that was proposed, and then a demand transition rate that results in no demand charges for the first 60 years of a 12-year program. These are really interesting to see, and it's just leading the way in Canada. And we should all be looking to BC Hydro to see their best practices. So tune in to Kim's presentation. I'm sure it's going to include lots of detailed information. But just to conclude on this slide, the overnight and demand transition rates were approved and came into effect on April 1st, 2020. So it's great news that came around and that's into effect now. The last main finding I wanted to share with you today, and I'll just move to the next slide, is that best practices in California are revealing as well for political context and the extent to which legislative revision and law passing is required to initiate utility engagement in meaningful ways for transit electrification. So it's not as easy and as simple as industry getting together. There really is a huge piece that comes from government legislation, and the government really needs to be involved. So with California, they are leading the way here. The main players there is the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, and investor-owned electrical utilities, Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California, Edison, San Diego Gas, and Electric, and Liberty Utilities as well. So there was a decision made in 2014 by the CPUC, and that determined that the state utilities had a critical role in the electric transportation sector as the fuel suppliers. So this decision also expanded the utility role in the supply of EV infrastructure. And any request for the utility to own public EV charging infrastructure would be considered on a case-by-case basis based on factors such as the nature of the utility program and the impact on competition. In 2015, Senate Bill 350, the Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act, was filed. So this legislation provided direction into the CPUC in 5 major areas, and I want to just review them really quickly. Number 1, integrated resource planning, energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation electrification, and disadvantaged communities. Lastly, which was really notable, there were legislation amendments to sections 701.1 and 740.8 of the Public Utilities Code, and you can read more in the report, so I won't go too much into detail, but they amended the definition of interests of the ratepayer, and this was amended to include reductions in pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, and added transportation electrification as a principal goal of electric utility resources planning. So this is really huge, to be honest, in terms of changing the way and how legislative decisions can positively impact electrification for transit fleets. So with that, just as I close today, we have some main recommendations. So the new legislation requires ministries of energies nationwide. So as we move kind of California's best practices and looking to BC leading the way, ministries of energy have to be at the table and they have to be involved in decision making. So to enable revision to the base rate, inclusive of transit from a social equity perspective and equivalence of customers' perspective, this is extremely important. And then also, CUTRIC is also calling for the Federal Minister of Energy to be the convener between provincial and territorial ministries of energy. We don't have necessarily one main place where all of this conversation and dialogue can take place. So we are calling on the Federal Minister of Energy to really take that lead. So with that, I would just like to share our report. I'll send that in the chat, and then also offer you the opportunity to join our Power Providers Utilities Transit Decarbonisation Committee next one in April 19th. So thanks very much. I'm looking forward to a deeper dive discussion with the panelists.
Thank you, Grace. So happy to see that BC Hydro was, presented as innovative. I was looking at Kim's presentation and I wrote down impressive, ambitious. So Kim will be presenting us right now BC Hydro's EV Fleet Ready 5-year program aimed to help customers prepare for connection. You'll hear about eligibility criteria, incentive, funding, advisory services for the fleet, for the infrastructures, as well as rates. So Kim, to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be joining you and have the opportunity to share with you some new programs that are on the horizon of being launched. You're definitely the first group that I've spoken to about this, so I'm pretty excited. And I'll just get going right away here. Just a quick overview of our electrification plan, which is really the backbone of some of the programs that we're running here. I'm going to launch into some details around our EV Fleet Ready program, and then just some other developments with regards to our rates. So really quickly, to speak specifically to the transportation component of the plan, and that was a really big nugget for us. There is actually a section outlined specifically for transportation. Really at a high level, it covers programs for personal vehicles, fleet vehicles, and large transportation organizations like transit, ferries, airport, rail. There is also a component to help replace mobile diesel generation in certain applications, but I'm going to focus on that a little bit later in the presentation. But at a high level, this program really includes steady funding and incentives for medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets. Oh, sorry. I pressed the wrong button there. Okay. With regards to the electrification plan, there's a very big component of interconnections involved in utilities. And as you can see, there is an opportunity with this electrification plan to help improve our processes. As mentioned, maybe previously, we are a regulated utility, and I will probably be the first person to admit, we could use some improvement in our interconnections process. It is very tariff-based, so that can be a bit slow moving. As you can see, the process to get connected is lengthy. So we really look to early engagement for all of our customers. And so if there's sort of one message I'm going to leave with you today, it's going to be engage with your utilities early and engage with your utilities often. And I think that regardless of whether you're regulated or not regulated, the message will still be the same. I'll be interested to see what Keegan has to say about that. So moving on, I'm just going to dive a little bit now into our EV Fleet Ready program. So this program is brand new for BC Hydro, in part developed by my team, which is really exciting. And it will be launching hopefully in May. So it hasn't been launched yet, but I want to make sure that people are aware of it. So you may have recalled, for those of you that have participated, I think last year in the ZEB conference, I talked a little bit about there being a fleet electrification study going on in the background for us. And that's where we really polled our own customers and really said, what is your biggest challenge to electrifying? And customers cited things like infrastructure costs. And I'm not just talking about the chargers, I'm talking about connecting the chargers to the grid. Obviously, lack of vehicle availability, really understanding their charging requirements and how that's going to work, and really a need for decision-making support. So they can't just, pull something out of thin air. This looks good. They really needed a plan and didn't know how to get there. Simultaneously, we also looked to utilities that had best practices. So we didn't just look to customers, we looked to utilities. They're listed here on who's really doing a great job in that space, who's offering programs, how are they offering programs. So we feel that our program that we've developed is very fulsome in that it's really based on customer feedback, and it's also based on utility best practices in market. So our Fleet Ready program is really made of three components. The first one is to help customers develop an EV-ready plan for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So that would be more on the study component side of things. We're going to help provide some funding to customers so they can study their usage and have a plan to move forward. The second component is an EV fleet-ready infrastructure incentive. So the ability to implement infrastructure in accordance with that plan. So not necessarily the chargers, not necessarily the vehicles, but the actual infrastructure that's required to connect chargers to the grid. Excuse me. And the third component is called the technology assessment funding. I refer to it as a little bit of my sandbox, and it's really funding for those early or short-term technology assessments of medium and heavy-duty fleet vehicle technology. So let's just take the CUTRIC Pan-Canadian bus trial that's happening in BC as an example of that kind of sandbox funding, where we're going to do this trial. It's for a period of time. There may need to be some incentive funding available to test and prove that concept, and we found a need for that in market as well. People need to try before they buy, so to speak. And just really quickly on the fleet component, there's really 4 areas. We'll have a consultant help do a fleet assessment. So do a detailed inventory, look at your annual kilometers, fuel, GHG emissions, look at across inventory, look out in the marketplace to see what's coming down the pipe and when it's replaceable. Also look at a charging plan for you, so determine power level, where it should be, and an infrastructure plan, help you determine electrical infrastructure. Because this is a new program, I wanted to really highlight the fact that there could be agencies out there, for example, transit agencies, who have a very well-developed plan. And I've certainly worked with enough of them to know that there is some of that going on currently. If we feel the plan really covers all the information that we need to move to the next step, we potentially could take an existing plan and just move to phase 2, which is that incentive funding component. A little bit of qualifier for the EV fleet ready plan, and I guess maybe 2, I'll just back up. If you think about, for example, transit agencies, their buses and their entire fleet of buses could qualify for this, but you could also consider all the vehicles that would support any of that transit fleet as well. So, employee fleets, things like that will also be included in this program. So here's a rough idea of costing. So for fleets that are less than 150 medium to heavy duty vehicles, we can pay up to a maximum of $10,000 for study funding. And for those fleets that are greater than 150, we can pay closer to $15,000 max. And those numbers come from what we've seen on average a study cost to be. So if study costs we find moving forward are coming in at much higher than these numbers, we can always go back to the drawing board, but we've kind of had to put a stake in the ground to start with while we're launching these programs. There is an eligibility criteria. The customers must have a minimum of 20 medium or heavy duty vehicles in their fleet, and the plan must design for a minimum of 6 zero emission vehicles to be incorporated within a 3-year period. And that's just to make sure that, we're not building infrastructure that will be abandoned, so to speak. There's also the infrastructure funding, as I mentioned. So this would be the second phase of when you actually go to implement. We can provide some funding up to 75% of the electrical infrastructure. This includes all those components there, the design of the electrical system, even the contractor labor. The 2 requirements are you must have an approved EV fleet ready program by BC Hydro. Either we do it with you or we approve one you already have. And then again, you must have a minimum of 6 vehicles and incorporate those into the fleet within a 3-year period. I'm trying to blow through this really quickly. I'm running out of time. Again, this last bucket, that technology assessments, incentive funding for short-term temporary projects, and potential funding for temporary charging projects as well. So we've had a few instances where we've had a customer that wants to trial, for example, a prototype shunt truck for a limited period of time. They don't want to install something permanently, and this is where that funding can help bridge that gap. Lastly, I just want to review the rate component that we had approved. Again, as Grace alluded to, we have an overnight rate and a demand transition rate that was really provided to help encourage the electrification of transportation and transit specifically. I will note that, as Grace mentioned, there's a 6-year period on the demand transition rate where we don't have any demand currently. And one of the things I'm exploring, and I'll just say exploring, with our regulatory group is really because of COVID. I think across the board, customers have had a bit of a stall moving forward. Very fortunately, nothing's been canceled, but just stalled. And I think if we could find a way maybe to extend that period, that would be very helpful to customers. I will tell you, I'm so excited that we have the rates in place, and hopefully the uptake will be great. But candidly speaking, there's very few customers using this rate. So I'm hopeful that we'll see more customers engage on that level now that things seem to be opening up, and we've got a large focus on clean transportation. And I think that's it for me now. I've taken up a ton of time, so I'll turn it back to Stephanie and look forward to having any questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. When I said this was ambitious, I think everyone will agree. So the aha moment is obviously your one message you want us to remember, meaning this is a lengthy process or early engagement is critical. Keegan, curious to hear you on that, because when I was looking at your presentation, I think one of your slides reads, energy costs can be managed today. Keegan?
Sorry about that. It just took me a second to bring that up there, and yeah, I think at Power On and in Ontario, our electricity utilities are structured a little bit differently from what they are like in BC, where BC is a vertically integrated utility, and so. Power On is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ontario Power Generation, and Ontario Power Generation is a regulated power generator in Ontario. So we're set up a little bit differently, and I think that's led us to take a little bit of a different approach. Where Kim works for the regulated side of BC Hydro, and I think one of the first things I'd say is it's amazing what Kim's team is doing, and that's what we need to see to spur this on. So it's great to see. And so what our approach has been is to really pursue this business on the unregulated side. And so OPG set up a new subsidiary called Power On Energy Solutions to really help customers electrify their fleets. And so Power On really does turnkey charging solutions for fleets, and the goal is to really simplify the process of electrifying for fleets and transfer risk around sort of the complex electrical infrastructure. We design, build, operate, and maintain electrical infrastructure, and it's really all of the stuff you see in that green box. Because as with bigger fleets, chargers is obviously the bare minimum, but we see many fleets looking for additional electrical infrastructure, and we provide all of that as part of our turnkey solution. We also will invest in the assets ourselves or finance them via charging as a service payments, and so there's a lot of creative opportunities that we can work with our fleets to provide. And so, I think it was alluded to around what can we do today, and so as I was saying, we've taken this from the unregulated perspective, and so I do believe there are opportunities for fleets to really manage their electricity costs. When we think about utilities, the key focus is around the cost of charging, the cost of new infrastructure, and then the ongoing cost of electricity bills. And so what we work with our clients to really make sure that they can manage those costs and reduce the risk related to those things, because this is your new fuel source. And so I think there's 3 different areas that really are a focus for us. And the first would be around demand management. So you pay a demand charge to your electric utility, and that's really for the wires that connect you to the electricity grid and the wires component of the grid. And so that's usually paid based on your peak demand, and we will work with our customers to really shift demand and flatten demand so that you're minimizing those costs and minimizing the infrastructure that you need to build out. If your buses are coming in and all charging at the same time, that can be quite expensive, and so you really need to be creative about optimizing that load. The next thing that we recommend and work with our customers to do is, I showed you that green box. There's all these different electricity assets. People might be installing battery storage or generation for resiliency and to manage grid outages. those assets have value to the electricity grid. And so we work to really capture that value and create value and lower the overall cost of electrification for transit fleets. And so I think that's really important. You know, you're installing a lot of very complex and valuable infrastructure, and you have to try to harness all the value that you can from those. And the last piece is, you know, we talked a little bit about demand chargers, and that's really the cost of wires in the electricity system. There's the electricity commodity, the actual electricity that you consume on your site. And so, you know, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in Canada, there are avenues to really manage those costs and create certainty. You know, in Ontario and Alberta in particular, that aren't vertically integrated utility models, there are cost management approaches, just like a transit agency might hedge diesel. There are approaches to manage the electricity commodity costs, and so we work with our clients to do that as well. And so, you know, I think it's great to see what BC Hydro is doing and being really forward looking as a utility to push the transition forward. But you know, we're out there working within sort of the existing regulatory framework to try to come up with solutions that also help transit agencies. And so that's a bit of the sort of unregulated perspective, unregulated side, and the perspective from that angle. And so, you know, I think it's really important, you know, while we're tackling these bigger issues like Kim is dealing with and really creating that transition, to know that there are other solutions that are available today and things that transit agencies can do to help manage their electricity costs and the costs of their utility infrastructure. And the other point, I think Kim's key takeaway was engaging with your utility early, and I 100% agree. And you know, as we're working with different utilities, we definitely like to follow that model too. So that's really all I had to present, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Keegan. Interesting perspective, you're right, between regulated and unregulated. So thank you for bringing this up. I do have questions, and I do invite the audience to send them along also. We have time. Our speakers, you know, were respective of their time slot. So thank you, everyone. Keegan, what step can transit agencies take to make working with their utilities easier? Any advice?
Yeah, I would go back to that point that Kim made and I just made. It's like start early, right? You know, as Kim was saying, utilities are used to their processes and procedures, and they have a way of going about things. So the earlier you can start and get it on their radar, the easier you're going to make your life. And just understanding that they're not going to sort of change overnight, right? And you got to sort of fit within that box. I think the other piece is have someone on your team, you know, whether it's someone like Power On or a consultant that understands the language of utilities and the world in which they work. You know, we are a subsidiary of a utility. We understand that world, and that can be really helpful for navigating the process and making sure you're getting with what you need. So I think it's kind of both sides need to work together, and it's important for the fleet to understand the utility too.
Can I just add in here, Keegan, I think it's a really good point that you make. Not all transit agencies are set up and have large teams. Like some of them are just one people teams managing their whole transit system. It's a real issue. Like to be able to go to fleet electrification and not have that staff. So Keegan, Kim, I think it's great that what you're doing at your organizations is really helping these transit agencies equip them and really guide them along in what needs to be done. So yeah, props to you both. I think it's amazing to see how much you're working together with these transit agencies, because they can't do it alone. It's just too much to handle, really.
Well said. Thank you, Grace. Kim, we were talking about working early, and how can you explain that BC Hydro and the government of British Columbia were the first one to introduce those enabling measures? What's your take on this?
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I mean, I think it's just the climate of BC is one of them. You know, we have legislation, we have a Clean BC plan at this point, we have clean electricity. So, you know, there's some natural conversations that are happening there. I think the other component, though, in all honesty, is just having good working relationships with our customers. Part of it is that is actually what we do. We have a key accounts team that specifically works with our larger customers to help waylay information back and forth with regards to, you know, our transit agencies will poke us on the shoulder and say, this is what we're tasked to do. What can you do to help? You're going to be a huge partner of ours continuing going forward. What can you do to help? And our ability to work with the province on a greater goal. So, you know, candidly speaking, I think BC is set up really, really well for that. But I also think too, we've got really strong customers and transit agencies that are very forward thinking. As I kind of mentioned, the transit agencies and frankly, all the customers I work with in transportation, they've all had electrification plans like years ago. This is not new for me. This is not new for them. It's only sort of really getting a little bit more airtime now as we actually look to implement. So we've got a strong customer voice. We've got, I would say, strong advocacy on the customer side. And that's really been a big help to push the dial forward. I don't know if that's been your experience, Keegan, on your end, but I would really say so much of what's driving activity in British Columbia and on the government side and that push to do it is really our customers themselves.
Thank you, Kim. Grace, I haven't read the report. I promise I will, though, because I want to before our April meeting. You did cover legislative changes and what is needed across the nation to help utilities in terms of legislation. I know you've mentioned a number of them from California, but what's your perspective for Canada?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of points I'd like to hit on here. Number one is the demand needs to be there. So Kim and Keegan, rightly so, if the demand isn't there, then it's really difficult to actually implement these plans, right? So the demand needs to be there first and foremost. But to get the demand there, legislation needs to be there. And, you know, there needs to be mandates. So one thing of like with the Californian example that I spoke to was the legislation did not just allow utilities to invest in transportation electrification measures, but it actually required them to do so. And that is a big change. So if we're looking to the Canadian context, right now, there are no current, you know, absolute demands that we need to go to this. And so really implementing that needs to come from government first and foremost. And there needs to be that coordinated approach, like I had mentioned during my presentation. You know, utilities, they're different across all provinces and territories, right? So it's difficult to manage, but there needs to be that convener there at the top, putting the word out that these things need to happen. And, you know, going back to collaboration, CUTRIC is kind of unique in its sense as an association. We're really the only transit technology consortium that brings in utilities and utilities perspectives. So having these conversations with not just between utilities and transit agencies, but bringing in different partners to make sure that everyone is speaking at the table and can engage in those conversations to learn what has to happen. That for me is really important.
Thank you, Grace. We have many participants today. We welcome your questions. Kim, Keegan, Grace, listening at each other, any piece of advice, recommendation, aha moment right now that you want to share?
I mean, I'd probably say it's fascinating to look at what Keegan is able to do, as he sort of said, in the unregulated space. in some aspects, a little bit of a dream when you're looking from a regulated space. I mean, there's a broader context happening there, but, you know, in many respects, Keegan can move the dial at a faster pace, which is pretty cool and exciting. And I think to the point, you know, it's a bit of a uncharted territory at this place in this journey. And I think it's really exciting to see what some people can do and how quickly they can move the dial and see the opportunity and take advantage and fill that gap that's so necessary, which is that component, right, from that whole green box that Keegan was talking about of what they what solutions they provide to the table. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, you know, there's a tremendous opportunity for utilities too, right? This is a huge growth area, and, you know, in the utilities make money by adding rate base, right? By adding assets and electrical infrastructure, that's how they make money, and this is a huge opportunity. And so it's great to see utilities like BC Hydro being proactive and really, you know, going after this. And I think that's what you see in California too. And so they're you know, Ontario is a little bit different because we have so many utilities. There's 60 local distribution companies, and so it's, you know, it's just harder for them to do what BC Hydro is able to do as one big utility. But I really, you know, that would be amazing to see that type of stuff happening here in Ontario as well, and really like facilitating electrification from a utility perspective.
Kim, you mentioned May. May is tomorrow, right? Did you not mention a May start date?
May is not for another month, but it's coming up quick in my world.
Yeah, mine too. So quite exciting, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, we've not had any programs in the past like this before, and honestly, this is my first kick at the can, and my team's first kick at the can at actually developing something that we, like, honestly, we really kind of said this is what we think we need. And BC Hydro was really wonderful to kind of grant us and say, okay, yeah, sounds good. So we pulled together all the information, justification for it. So I just maybe as a blanket statement, because the programs are brand new and we've never had programs like this before, we're very open to, you know, we'll make shifts on course as necessary. So I think for those people, I'm hoping we'll have a strong uptake in the program. But when we do, you know, please pack your patience, and we can make modifications as we go along. But first and foremost, we need to see people participating in order for us to know that this is the chunk that's going to help close some of that gap. And that's really what our purpose is. And I ask myself every day, it's like, what can I do to help close that gap to see more electric transit come down the pipe?
Thank you. So listen, I think I'm looking at the time. I wanted to obviously thank our speakers, our panelists. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your great presentation. Thank you for the audience for attending today during lunchtime for certain people. So we appreciate that. Thank you to CUTRIC for organizing this conference and these panels. I think I saw 16 panels, 45 speakers. So quite impressive, and we're thankful to CUTRIC for that. For those who might have missed this morning's intro, because it might have been early for certain out west, I want to let you know amazing news. CUTRIC has been named the National Planning Service for Infrastructure Canada's Zero Emission Transit Fund to support transit agencies and municipalities plan their way to a zero emission transit fleet. So it's amazing news, and the future is not only bright, but it's very green for Canada. So I think we have a break for lunch for those in Mississauga like I. Please take note of our next session. I believe it's at 2 p.m. and we will be covering CUTRIC's ZEB Consulting Services launch. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.